Advisory Team. Facilitated questions and answers will follow promptly after remarks conclude. Without further ado, it is my privilege to welcome Governor Josh Green.
Okay, thank you for hanging with us. So we just had an update on the emergency appropriation for Maui. Now we're going to dive into actually one of the kind of questions that was asked. So just a couple slides just so you get the big picture and we'll get to why we're doing this. Okay, so first slide, the Hawaii we deserve. We have a $10.4 billion budget that you're going to see the details of in the coming days as they fully emerge from the legislature. One of the things that happened, and I alluded to it, was historic tax reform, which is the second part of our green affordability plan. That's the increases in the standard deductions, and we're going to adjust the brackets. All of this is super important because it's going to help our local people, but there's something else that I wanted to announce, and that's a Hawaii Climate Advisory Team, or the CAT. Okay, so here we go. Again, next slide. This is kind of a breakdown of some of the appropriation that you guys were asking about, what happens in the coming years. We have to have additional monies for rental housing and the dwelling units. We have to have additional monies for our green energy infrastructure work, and we're building housing. So that's a part of our $10.4 billion appropriation, which I know people are very interested in. And I can definitely give everyone all these slides thereafter. We additionally have $196.1 million in fiscal year 25 appropriations. Of the $400 million total in Senate Bill 3068. Now, this additional money will be complementing the large amount of money that we have through June 30th. And for monies that lapse and that have gone into the Master Disaster Fund, everyone knows we have a lot of work to do. But much of that very expensive work, of course, occurred when people were in hotels and we were trying to get them back into a stabilized part of life. Now, here's a quick preview on what we've passed. The next slide. The GAP 2 plan builds on our progress before. We needed major relief for people in their cost of living because they can't afford homes. So for families that are making between $80,000 and $90,000, we're going to gradually reduce their tax burden by about $4,000 per year. It helps with their cost of living. Really what it's meant to do is incentivize Kama'aina to come home, and that will stimulate our economy. That is a big deal, which we'll talk about for the weeks to come. So this is the transformation of society. But we also have to transform how we deal with these kind of disasters. And that's, now let's go to the next slide. That's what this climate advisory team is going to do. What we need to do is we need to have policies going forward once and for all that provide insurance against future disasters. There were bills this year. They weren't ready to pass per the legislature, and that is okay. But what has to happen in time is we have to get this tiger by the tail. If you remember, right after I was given the honor to take office, we proposed the climate impact fee. Had we passed that then, even at the level of $25 per person that traveled to Hawaii, we'd be cranking out $250 million every year, which we could securitize, grow through bonds, and use to mitigate climate disasters, to deal with erosion, to perfect our parks, to harden our infrastructure against whether it was a fire or a tsunami or what have you. We need to do something like that. And so I put together this team. We will model our disaster risk and determine what is sustainable going forward. What you're going to hear in the coming weeks and months is that insurers will not insure states like Hawaii, where there's high risk. If that happens and we start losing insurers from the market, we will have to come back in special session or take emergency action to stabilize insurance markets. I would rather do it through a process which will include input from legislators. I'm going to task some of our best thinkers in the state on this topic. Chris Benjamin, who is a longtime friend and advisor to me, who's been working on climate issues for quite some time now since his retirement, is going to lead this team. And we will get input from everyone. Next slide. We'll get input from everyone to see what the threat actually is from natural disasters on our economy. We will find what's most cost effective to do it. We're going to look at ways to mitigate the financial burdens of these kind of disasters. And right now, we know that it's going to cost more than $5 billion to recover from Maui once you take into account all of the litigation and people's losses. That is not easy to make up without some additional tools. So the CAT will spearhead Hawaii's climate resilience policy. It will be responsible for the management of our legislation going into the next session with our expert team. So our policy team will work closely with them. Here are some of the people that are going to participate. Let's go to the next slide. We have, as I mentioned, Chris Benjamin, who's going to be the chairman of this committee. I also have engaged several groups that have worked on these kind of problems across the country, specifically the wildfires in California. So representatives from Tucera, from Houston Hennigan, O'Melveny and Myers, these are the leaders in the world that have worked on these kind of disaster programs. They will sit with Chris. They'll bring in other experts. We will make sure that our insurance commissioners and others who know these markets will give us best recommendations so that next year we don't have any problems passing bills that can allow us to prepare for the future. I think we should hold everyone to account, and that is, of course, appropriate. But there are going to be future fires or storms, hurricanes. There are going to be future challenges that we can't just go to the well with general funds all the time for. And so I would personally prefer that some of that cost is borne by travelers into the state of Hawaii, but there are other mechanisms which we can go into detail kind of once they give their recommendations that won't hurt our taxpayers but will protect us. So every key stakeholder you can imagine will be engaged. It will occur over the course of the next 6 to 8 months before the next legislature starts. And if recommendations are strong enough in the next 2.5 months, when the Senate comes back to confirm or review some judges, if we have recommendations that are good enough, we will discuss them with the leadership of the House and Senate and collaborate to see if a special session would benefit us to do it then. I don't want to impugn anybody. It was very hard work to pass this wildfire relief that we just heard about, but we do have to take action because we cannot in the future avoid this issue. It is going to continue to come. So that is going to be a very big deal. And I will tell you that I truly wish we had this in place back last May when we first were debating bills, because then when the fire occurred, we would have not had quite the calamitous reach that we had to make to find these resources to get people back to a place of peace. We would have had extra resources right away. But the Ledge did do a good job using resources that we have. They did avoid using the major disaster funds that we have in the rainy day fund. That was a challenge. We need something like this going forward because in the future we're going to have to deal with the $30 billion of climate change effect that is taking away parts of the North Shore, that's taking part of our capacity to stop fires. That is happening because of climate change, and we're going to need some funds. So I'll pause there and answer any questions you've got.
Our first question comes from Ashley, HPR.
Can you talk about, what parts of, the securitization bill or the wildfire fund that need to be specifically studied through this CAT to get it to the point where legislature would feel comfortable passing?
Yes, I think that for securitization in general, we need to have very tight guardrails so we don't feel like we're bailing anybody out. Securitization is actually a mechanism that people all across the globe use to bond and get extra resources. Frankly, it would have been just as good to securitize monies off of a climate impact fee. That would have been just as helpful for us. In this case, it was securitization that some of the parties to the wildfire are seeking. I don't want bills to go up for anybody. I want to see us contain the cost of energy. We don't have as many tools available to us to do that at the moment as I would like. That's what securitization was about. You could put securitization rates at 1%, that bills couldn't go up more than 1%. You could make clear that they will only be used for fire mitigation and to prevent future fires. You can put those kind of provisions in. That's one thing to do. But I'm not even wed to that particular process. What I'm saying to the world is Hawaii will take action on a going forward plan to insure ourselves against disasters so that people can keep in the insurance market for our condos, keep in the insurance market for our commercial properties and cities and towns. That's very important because the moment they leave, costs are going to go through the roof. And we are now in a place where we have to essentially insure ourselves against these kind of calamities.
Our next question comes from Daryl, Hawaii News Now.
Governor, is it a conflict of interest that the CEO of a huge landowner, he was the head of Alexander Baldwin up until the middle of last year, I believe, is there a conflict of interest there to have someone who's basically a big landowner be in charge of this team?
No, he retired and has been actually one of our climate advisors. Interestingly, Chris Benjamin has been one of the most liberal advocates on climate change mitigation that I've had. He's become kind of a climate change advocate, and it's a transformation that's been exceptional to see. But we're also going to be asking people from like Blue Planet to get involved, people who work with the Conservancy agencies, and ultimately a lot of the advice we're going to get is from legal teams, how you construct insurance plans. There's not going to be any discussion about buying lands or how to use those lands. The discussion is going to be about how to insure the state in case fire comes across, a community. And so I think he's a pretty good choice for this. We will get input from everybody, though, and I just need a chairperson who understands the issues. And because Chris has retired and is passionate about this, he seems like a good choice.
Governor, our next question is Marcel, Civil Beat.
Governor, is the idea here to, it's part of the thinking here to have, this was like a missing link, so to speak, in all the years that, the past several years that this climate impact fee has come right up to the finish line. And have you guys had like your own internal discussions and saying maybe this is a potential solution or something that was missing in the discussion to convince lawmakers to finally get it over the finish line?
Yes. Yes.
Second part to that is, are you hoping that this team will help you pass a fee as you kind of laid it out this year, where it would still generate, I think it was about 65 million a year, the same general structure? Are you still trying to get that across the finish line?
Yeah, I am. I tease with just that one word answer. The answer is I want to bring more of the stakeholders to the table. People were working at this in several different parts of the legislative community, and so that we didn't get everybody on the same page. And each of the proposals could be good. I even spoke with Senate President this morning about one of them, which is just an expansion of our current program, which isolates certain special places in Hawaii where people do pay a fee. We could geolocate where people are traveling, because that's done now. And if they want to have an offer of going to a certain special place, they could pay a climate impact fee. We could do a better job with that. The technology's now there, but I want all this stuff explored. The challenge with those kind of solutions is they tend to be very site-specific, and we usually are required to spend the monies right in that one spot. I want to have resources spent globally to protect the state so that we can have a reinsurance market for disasters, for natural disasters. I would like to have a dedicated fund in perpetuity for DLNR to protect our beaches. I'd like to have resources for the incoming fire marshal, which we're going to now have. It's going to be important to empower that person so that they can get the right equipment. And then the Department of Transportation needs additional resources to do fire breaks. So all of this is necessary. It's going to cost money. And I think that we don't want to worry about good or bad budget years where we can or can't protect ourselves against natural disasters. Natural disasters don't work along the same kind of legislative calendars that we work here on. We need something into the future. And I think Hawaii actually could probably be the first one to do this for the whole state. It's happening now in Spain. They're just starting. There's some small fees in the European Union in general. But as a state in the United States, I'd like to protect us globally. I think they're going to give us 4 or 5 options, and we will then give 4 or 5 bills to the legislature to consider. But it has to happen. I mean, it really has to happen, because sooner or later, people are going to leave our market, and we are going to have a full partner in energy, no matter who it is. Whether it's HECO or another partner, somebody's going to have to know that Hawaii is a safe and affordable place to provide energy infrastructure. And right now, there's some doubt about that because of the fire. And so we're stepping in. We're going to provide some extra support. I like the simplicity, like I've said before, about a climate impact fee. There's a certain elegance to it. but some people had issues about collecting it or whether it would affect tourism. That's the conversation we'll have.
And the idea again is roughly half of the annual earnings could go towards those departmental programs and maintenance that you were talking about, and the other half would go towards what's considered kind of a disaster relief fund. Is that right?
Exactly. And what we would do, though, is for the monies that went towards like dealing with shoreline erosion or extra infrastructure, there we would use that revenue to bond out large sums of money at very low rates because we have great credit. And so that's been the benefit of keeping our rainy day fund intact. Our credit rating has stayed great, and that was credit to the legislature. But when we generate revenues, for example, right now there's $1.5 billion in the rainy day fund. It generates over $50 million a year just in growth because of interest rates and growth of markets. If we simply took that money and split it 50-50 towards insurance and towards dealing with some of these challenges and bonding them, that's where the word securitization comes. We could do that ourselves. We do that a lot. We get bonds based on cash that we have. We could be taking proactive steps to prevent the next fire, to prevent some insurance company from leaving, to prevent a large shortfall in settlement funds. So I'm just trying to look forward now, and I know that the legislature had its hands full coming up with that very complicated budget. So we're going to call it kind of call détente right now because these are big questions, but that's what this work group's going to work on. And we'll give you transparent updates, and just in case anyone's worried about conflicts, that's totally understandable and fine. I just need someone to carry out the meetings and convene large groups. We have some really excellent experts on board now that can give us the best recommendations on what's been done in certain places and what they wish they had done in California and other places where they had fires. There's a lot of people that wish that the wildfires in California had been handled differently. There's still a lot of problems with bankruptcy and lack of monies to build.
Our final question comes from Andrew, Honolulu Star Advertiser.
So was the formation of the CAT largely or primarily in response to pieces of legislation getting stuck in the legislature this year, like the climate impact fee, like securitization, and the wildfire damage fund?
Yes, completely. Yeah, I just felt I needed to have more voices who could then reach out to legislators, get their best input. I do have now some additional experts, on call, so to speak, because they're working the settlement claims, they're working a lot of the legislative discussions from before, but also they have the capacity to have very detailed discussions with all the partners that we have in the One Ohana Fund. They see some of the resources that we actually have available in the insurance space. These people are accustomed to settling multi-billion dollar disputes, so they can see where the puck is going. And that gives me the capacity to put a new player or two onto the field. That's what these bills would be.
Our real final question from Daryl, Hawaii News Now.
Sorry, you keep talking and it keeps making me want to ask another question. You mentioned $5 billion going forward with more costs of this disaster. I thought I heard you say that.
Yeah.
But what's the urgency of getting this done this year that you would go so far as to maybe try and talk the legislators into a special session? With all the money you have in the bank, why can't this wait till the next session?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. For one, we've already had indications that some of the insurers are considering leaving the market from Hawaii on several grounds. One is condominium risks. We've had some fires in condominiums, and some condos were not fully, prepared to prevent fires, so there were some infrastructure questions, so people were leaving. Then we had the volcanic eruption of a couple of years ago, which took out a part of the Big Island, and there weren't adequate insurance resources for them. And then, of course, the wildfire on Maui. So I guess what I'm saying is just stabilizing the market right now will make a big difference for HECO, Kamehameha Schools, Hawaiian Tel, the state of Hawaii, the county of Hawaii, county of Maui, forgive me, and the county of Hawaii also, because they had the fires from the lava flow. If they lose their ability to get insurance, or they lose their ability to bond because they are in financial straits, we're in trouble. And the sooner we stabilize those markets, the sooner that they can go to the capital markets and borrow money at normal rates on their own and pay for infrastructure, pay for fire prevention, mitigation, rather than us paying for it. So a lot of the work that I was trying to express we need to do, and I'm going to continue to work on expressing this idea, is by being a state that is stable and has a going forward plan to deal with disasters, we can have people at good rates insure our infrastructure, insure our companies. Without that, and having suffered a disaster of this magnitude, we could be behind all the other markets in the country and pay the worst rates, pay the highest premiums. So that's very important. We have enough money to kind of pay our way out of claims, I believe, and to be generous as we're seeing, or we're trying to be kind for those who lost a loved one. But the scope of the full recovery is much bigger than that. And I think that everyone who is involved, everyone, is going to try to make good on repairing and recovering from the disaster. So they're going to need to borrow money. They're going to need to bring in other investors. It will be easier if we have a good, solid insurance plan against disasters. That's really what I'm trying to get at. And once people understand that completely, they realize it's not a bailout for anybody. It's not our money as taxpayers that goes there. It'll make it easier for us to draw in investors and partners without being taken over. The worst scenario, and this is important, is that any of our companies get bought out by vulture capitalists who don't care about Hawaii but want to make a big margin on a quick buyout and flip a company. We'll all pay for that if that happens. I'm trying to prevent those guys from taking advantage of our people, our county, our state, our ratepayers, and our taxpayers. That's what pushing these bills was all about. We bought some time because they did a very good job in the recovery finances, but only so much time can go by before some of those other shoes are going to drop. And when those start happening, I've cautioned the legislative leadership, we have to be on our toes and come back quickly if something like that happens. If nothing happens and we're stable, we will take our time. We'll go into the next legislative session and we'll contemplate these bills. But I'm not going to stand by if it looks like we're going to see a quick spike in rates, or if any of our institutions are going to be taken over by someone that's, I guess, less kind. Okay. So the next series of questions will go to Daryl, but it'll be on a separate day. And we just appreciate you guys taking this much time today. Aloha.
This formally concludes today's bifurcated bill signing and news conference. Mahalo and be well.